So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to another custom scenario. And if you're seeing this, it's a sign that I didn't encounter the same technical difficulties that I did in the Moria replay, which I am slightly worried about as we go into this replay. But this one is a lot more open, there's also less factions on display, and it is a shorter one as well, in spite of the fact that it is a custom scenario. It's not quite a monolithic battle, as the likes of which custom scenarios usually do turn into. And part of the reason for that may be that this is a new scenario maker, I believe. I think... What's the player's name again? I have it written down. Do I? Yes, Theron. There it is. So Theron, I believe, is playing as one of the attacking armies way down there. Actually, it's from Mevan's perspective this battle replay is going to be shown. But yeah, a new scenario creator is always a good thing to behold. It's a sign that we may get a few more maps as well. And this one is certainly a siege-esque battle. It has a similar sort of feeling to quite a few of those more open battles that we saw. Froggy's interpretation of what I called Knock of a Ragclaw is probably the closest thing that I would say to this the closest analogous to this battle I would suggest. And this, the scenario replay I should say, spitting my words out a little bit here, Ruins and Blood is the name that it was given to me as, but I'm sure that I can find an appropriate name from the map, because this is two Arthedain armies on the defence and the dark, heavily armoured legions of Isengard and Umbar are descending upon this. I would assume that Umbar had to sail up the river Gwathlo to get here, quite a long way away from the City of Stars. But yeah, going to be an interesting one this. Arthedain on the defence definitely have a lot of good defensive tools, solid infantry, solid enough infantry. But obviously their real showstoppers come with their ranged units, javelins and archers and the like. Also got a little bit of artillery as well, but more on the defensive position later. Definitely has a very northern Arthedain-y sort of feel to it, this stone circles, the general colour palette as well. So we'll go through the army from which we are going to be viewing the perspective of, and it's going to be Mevan playing as one of the Isengard armies. There is a time limit on this battle as well, which is quite interesting, so the attackers won't be able to engage in the same sort of tactics that we saw last time out in the Moria battle replay, where they were able to really take their time with it and wear the enemy down slowly over time. The attackers will have to be a lot more aggressive, and understandable considering it's only 18,000 frames. So, we'll start off with him. Uruk-hai infantry. Now they are going to be able to outperform the basics of Arthedain. The pikes of Arthedain will be able to hold them at bay from the front, but when it comes to just the all-out offensive capability, the survivability as well of all the infantry that Isengard have at their disposal, they will be able to defeat the rank and file Arthedain troops. Arthedain, however, do have those elites, which Isengard maybe don't have quite so much access to. Some really high quality stuff like the Wardens of the North, Dismounted Knights of Inumnus, whereas Isengard are much more about their core and the depth of quality that they have there. The Uruk-hai pikemen, for example, will be able to outperform the Arthedain pikemen, albeit they will have to advance, presumably, into the jaws of Arthedain's skirmishers. Uruk-hai berserkers, a couple of units of them, including a unit of Nazkai as well. A couple of units of Warg Riders. This sort of speed and manoeuvrability will be useful in a map that's a little bit more open than most custom scenarios we see, and also, because there is a time limit of course, a unit of fast movers like this can help expedite your progress through the field. A unit of Guards of Orthanc, a very heavy unit of spears, very nice and defensible. They will last an awfully long time in the melee, but they don't do damage all that quickly, to be fair. And we've also got some Uruk-hai crossbowmen and some Uruk-hai archers. The crossbows in particular offer a skirmish option that Arthedain themselves don't actually have, but they do need to get close enough to be used. The Uruk-hai archers, meanwhile, will just be there to try and tempt Arthedain into using their archers on something which isn't really worthwhile. Then we have Wojciech, who has got some Uruk-hai raiders, obviously not on the same level as the Uruk-hai infantry, and they won't be enough quality-wise to match up to the equivalent Arthedain units, but they are here in great numbers. So they do have some numbers on their side as well. Isengard, usually Isengard are one of those factions where you can fall into the trap a little bit of not bringing enough numbers and going only for their quality units. But Isengard can bring numbers in the same way that the other Orc factions can. We've got some Uruk-hai infantry just in behind them as well. Some armour piercing in the shape of the Uruk-hai Reavers. Basic armour piercing anyway. Obviously the Nazkai and the Berserkers represent a higher tier option here. But the Uruk-hai Reavers themselves, while they will be very, very vulnerable of course to the Arthedain skirmishers, they will be able to do a good job in melee should they be able to get there in good enough condition. Uruk-hai pikemen as well, getting ready to march forward. Units of Trolls of the White Hand as well. Now if they're deployed at the right time against more defensive Arthedain infantry, they could do a lot of good damage, but Arthedain do have the options for dealing with them, including of course the Troll Slayers, but also stuff like the dismounted Fornoster Rhine Knights, should they be present. And we've got more Uruk-hai crossbowmen back here as well. So more of a rank and file kind of army with lower tier units, this from Wojciech, but he is also going to be the first one in, so he will probably be the one taking the hits for Mevon, and presumably as well for Y2K86, who is playing as the Umbar contingent. They've sailed a long way to be here to get some vengeance on the faithful. Belagair archers, they will be good in a skirmish fight against Arthedain's basic skirmishers, but they won't be anything too special. You're not going to win the battle with a unit like the Belagair archers, but you will be able to make the opponent's archers' job a little bit more difficult if they are used correctly. We've also got some Belagair footmen here. No armour upgrades on these guys, but they're still just going to be here to offer the initial wave. Not a huge amount of damage on basic human spears such as this, but they stay alive well enough. And Arthedain themselves are not the highest damage faction in melee either, so they should be able to last just fine. And where Umbar and Arthedain differ is Umbar have got a little bit more of a focus around their heavier units of infantry, and nowhere is this more apparent than in the Alcarondas Legion, because Arthedain really don't have an equivalent unit to this, certainly not on the same level of quality anyway, and there are several units of them. Here we saw these guys held back a little bit in the last battle on Moria, but I would assume that Y2K is not going to have that luxury on this occasion. He's going to have to be a little bit more aggressive with them. A couple of units of Balakith shield bearers without the armour upgrade as well. They are mace men. They're not as impressive as the Alcarondas Legion overall in front of them, but that armour piercing is useful on occasion, and this should be one of those occasions, to be frank, because Arthedain don't have that many units that have lower armour, only their higher tier Dunedain, and you wouldn't really be dealing with them with mid to upper tier line infantry anyway. You'd have to find a different way to deal with them, such as the Naru Na'aru Royal Guard, who can shoot at them from afar. The lighter Dunedain leather armour will be a bit more of a problem for everything other than the Wardens of the North, stuff like the Troll Slayers, and the Dunedain Rangers will want to steer well clear of getting involved in a skirmish fight with the Royal Guard. Troll Slayers wouldn't want to close up under that level of arrow fire anyway, and a bit of artillery as well. The Trebuchet could be really useful when you consider the scale of the hill that they have to climb. The Trebuchet could be just the thing for getting rid of some stubborn defensive positions. Now then, we shall move across the hills and moorland to see what Arthedain have at their disposal. We've got Stormhawk playing as one of the Arthedain armies. They do have the armour upgrade on these Arthedain marksmen, so the breastplates are here. Will make them a little bit better in a skirmish fight against stuff like the Belagair archers. Will make them more resilient to stuff like the Uruk-hai archers as well. But Arthedain have got plenty of ranged tools, so it shouldn't be too much of a surprise to see that they are going to be rolling with them today. Only one level of armour upgrade on these Arthedain men-at-arms, again just rolling with the breastplate rather than the full plate armour that the Arthedain men-at-arms can be given. But this is still a decent upgrade for them. They'll be able to do decently against the more entry-level Isengard and Umbar units, but as soon as the going gets tough against stuff like Berserkers, Alcarondas Legion and the like, that's where the Arthedain men-at-arms will be outclassed, and Arthedain will have to rely on other methods rather than just a stout-hearted front line. Meanwhile, over here, guarding the approach with the windmills, a couple of units of Arthedain pikemen, again with one level of armour upgrade, although they only get to the one level. This is going to be a very important unit, I feel. Arthedain always rely a little bit on numbers of pikes to hold the front line, and I don't see why that should be any different here. Another unit of them back here with some slightly more high quality units. Dismounted Knights of Annuminus are a really good unit of sword and shield bodyguard infantry, very, very resilient indeed. And they're going to be backed up by some heavy swordsmen. The dismounted Fornost Rhine Knights, like I said, good against the trolls, will be very good as well against some of the more lightly armoured troops that Isengard have got that are in numbers. Also, in terms of their tier, they are on a similar sort of tier as the Alcarondas Legion, but they're obviously going to be here in lower numbers by the looks of things. A couple of units of Arthedain men-at-arms with the armour upgrade as well. They too have a Trebuchet in a much better position than the Umbar one is, and a unit of devastating Wardens of the North. These steel bows with their armour-piercing arrows could be absolutely vital when it comes to diffusing some of the upper-tier Isengard and Umbar units. Now then, moving over here to Percival the Corrupted, the final player on the field today. He too has got some Arthedain men-at-arms with one level of armour upgrade, some dismounted Fornost Rhine Knights, some Dunedain Peacekeepers. I really am a fan of this unit, although on this occasion, because Isengard and especially Umbar are going to be factions which focus a little bit more on their armour, they won't be quite so dominant. Against the basic level Uruk-hai is where they will probably be most effective. They're still a high quality unit of infantry of course, but generally speaking they are really good trash killers. Over here we also have a unit of Annuminus Gate Guards, the higher tier unit of Arthedain pikemen. They also buff the morale of nearby units, which is very nice for them. Another unit of Arthedain pikemen with one level of armour upgrade. Another unit of Knights of Annuminus. And another unit of dismounted Fornost Rhine Knights as well. You can see a bridge over here. always a little bit awkward to try and traverse, and this is going to be one of those defensive positions I think that the defenders will be really glad that they have. Arthedain Pikemen and Arthedain Ballista also over here, and you can see they're already planning on really holding from this location. Arthedain Marksmen, some Arthedain Men-at-Arms in behind, and another one guarding this very fine looking manor house of this little settlement in the hills. And then over here some Dunedain Mounted Company, a unit of... It's an interesting unit this, because they are melee cavalry. You'd think they'd be really, really useful. Not so much the case, because, like I've said several times, in this current version of the game, before the update, non-multiple HP cavalry is very rarely worth it, and if it is, it's because it's lower tier cavalry that's very cheap and disposable, the likes of which Cand and Rohan, for example, could field in large numbers. Not really the case when you're talking about spending money on Dunedain like this, but this is a scenario. You're not paying for your armies, so they will be quite useful perhaps for intercepting any warg riders that they perceive, and there's another unit of these Dunedain peacekeepers as well. So, without further ado, let's begin. So, first order of business clearly is going to be the attackers having to get up here fairly sharpish, and just having a look from the outside of this settlement. Of course, the bridge is intended to be the main frontal entrance to this little Arthedain holding, but that's also going to be the least attractive proposition for the attackers, I think. Now, it is worth saying that I believe there are rules associated with this game, so I would assume they have to attack over the bridge rather than focusing all their efforts over on this side where Umbar lay. But even Umbar over here have got a little bit of a daunting task ahead of them, because not only do they have to go the long way around, potentially arrive later than the Isengard forces that are going to try and go across the bridge, but also they are going to be doing so in full view of the Arthedain marksmen, and as good as the Umbar skirmish line is, the first shot can be all important, and any shots Umbar can get will be most appreciated, I'm sure, by the Black Numenorian infantry. Now, I don't believe this is a possible way up the hill. If it is, I'm sure it would be an oversight, but it would be an interesting oversight at the very least. There is a floating tower in the distance over there. But there's also the artillery, so while this is a much better approach into the settlement itself, it is worth bearing in mind that it's going to take Umbar significantly longer to get here, and they are still going to have to contend with a lot of really nasty tools. Further down here you can see Isengard are going to be leading the way. Uruk-hai Raiders, I wouldn't lead the way with the pikes. The pikes are the sort of thing you want to save for later on if you're the attacking forces, because they can be so difficult to deal with if you're really feeling the pressure of the battle as it's built up. Your army's depleted, lots of casualties. A fresh unit of pikes for one side or the other can really make all the difference, because you need numbers to be able to batter down a pike formation from the front, and that's the sort of thing that clearly you're not going to have as the battle goes on. Now, the Trolls of the White Hand could be an interesting choice. You can see that the Warg Riders are going to be moving up fairly quickly. Mevan's army on the way as well, as the Isengard forces begin to scale the hills. You can see there are some Arthedain forces right on the edge over here, albeit you can see an example of Medieval 2's units splitting up a little bit. Very densely packed together. It's like one of those Arctic expeditions where they're all tied together to make sure one of them doesn't get lost, only in this time it's to make sure one of them doesn't tumble down the hill to their doom. They're actually in a good position to shoot though if they do decide to open fire from there. Still quite a long way off at the Umbar forces. This is going to be quite a brutal fight once it gets underway, I think. Isengard are probably going to try and pile across the bridge as quickly as they possibly can. They don't really have too much of a choice because it's the only way in, so you may as well go all in and try and bring your superior numbers and some of your really nasty units like Berserkers to bear immediately. Because when you're in this sort of situation, there's no going around the fact that you've got to go across this bridge. It's going to be bloody, it's going to be hard, but if you do so quickly and decisively, you should be able to make that work for you. The Trolls of the White Hand could be exactly the sort of thing you want to send in first, one of those rare situations where it might make quite a lot of sense. There's also that ballista there. It's going to be pretty nasty for the orcs indeed. As the smoke rises from the abodes, the trebuchet is beginning to fire. Will it hit? The trebuchets do tend to be quite accurate, but this is a long way off, even in spite of the huge vantage point they have over the Umbar forces. They are going to have to start running post-haste, and this is going to make a big difference. The Umbar forces may very well arrive on the front line fatigued, and that will impact their abilities in melee. And those Arthedain pikes as well. Not seeing any pikes from Umbar. The first casualties sustained. A glancing blow on this unit of Balagai footmen, but no Balagai pikes. and no Naru Naaru Sentinels either, so those Arthedain pikemen could be absolutely vital. This trebuchet is also going to have to push its way through the position that trebuchet has taken up, but the trebuchet here seemingly just taking a more casual approach. That was actually a very nice hit as well, hitting into not only some Balagai footmen but also some Balaketh shield bearers. Now, seeing some dead Uruk-hai pikemen, presumably as the result of some not artillery volleys, some archer volleys, and Wojciech is going to be leading the way with his Uruk-hai raiders, the most disposable of his units. The Uruk-hai reavers are almost certainly going to take horrendous losses very, very quickly. Their leather armour is not going to be able to withstand the might of the Dunedain on this occasion, I fear. Meanwhile, this trebuchet continues to bombard, sailing just overhead of the Alcarondas Legion. While they may be in loose formation, the larger splash damage of the trebuchet could be really, really useful. In fact, there is one that seemed to catch that trebuchet volley right in the head. His friend is standing over his smouldering corpse with no empathy whatsoever, as I suppose you would expect of Black Numenorians. You can see there the cathedral at the centre of this little settlement. Going to be the goal for Umbar to try and take. The faithful will not be permitted to have their little safe haven, if they have anything to say about it. Balagai archers moving forward, so Y2K is going to try and open up with the skirmish fight, as you would probably want to do, considering you have archers such as this at your disposal, but the terrain is so much in favour of Arthedain that this may not work, and his units are of course already winded. Now then, going across the bridge with these Uruk-hai raiders, no shots coming in from the archers yet, but there doesn't really need to be, because one unit of Uruk-hai raiders is not going to be enough to try and break down this Arthedain front line. It's only when they start arriving in greater numbers that Arthedain will start to use their ranged units. But the first melee engagement does get underway, and the upgraded Arthedain men-at-arms will be enough to defeat these Uruk-hai raiders, who actually looks as though they have taken losses from something. Irregardless of that, the Arthedain infantrymen will be sufficient to bring down the basic fighting Uruk-hai, and this will be why I think there's that unit of Arthedain marksmen there. There's another unit of Uruk-hai raiders, several of them already falling by the wayside, so a little bit of ammunition expended already. The Reavers would be a target that Arthedain, I'm sure, would want to go after. Over here, meanwhile, Balagai archers making their way through this little farmstead on the outer edges of the settlement. What a miss with the first shot, but a hit with the second, and again cutting down on the amount of Balaketh shield bearers that Umbar have at their disposal. So Umbar are going to try, I mean, again, over here with Umbar, you could make the argument for taking this approach more so than on the front. Isengard will need to get their own archers in support. Again, not entirely sure what is intended to be gained by committing forward this one unit of depleted raiders. The professional soldiery of Arthedain will be able to hold the line against this sort of thing. This is exactly the sort of unit, actually, that these basic sword and board infantry units from the Western Kingdoms are going to be really good at fighting against. Very efficient from Arthedain. And eventually you're going to have to tangle with Arthedain's ranged units anyway, so you may as well rip the band-aid off and get it over and done with. Balagai archers moving forward, and they are going to start opening up with their bows by the looks of things. Some Arthedain pikemen scurrying away. They don't want to find themselves in the crosshairs of these archers. But there are some Dunedain troll slayers here who, interestingly enough, already reloading. Goes to show what an advantage in terms of range having the high ground can give you, because that is a long way for javelins to fire, but that is a blank fire. He's going to cancel Stormhawk there, I believe. Or at least it looks like it, because those javelin men are not throwing projectiles, nor should they against something like Balagai archers, to be honest. But, I mean, yeah, Troll Slayers are going to be exactly the sort of thing those Balagai archers are going to want to target. Yes, they're multiple HP, but as soon as those hit points are expended, they're not quite so heavily armoured as some of the infantry that they will be fighting alongside today. Meanwhile, going through this tree, I mean, these Uruk-hai raiders not being killed off rapidly by the Arthedain men-at-arms, and nor, to be fair, have they looked like running thus far, so perhaps a little bit more resilient mentally than I gave them credit for, and physically. But then, the Arthedain men-at-arms are not the unit that you would pick for dealing damage all that quickly. The Uruk-hai Raiders looking like moving forward. Now the time limit is still ticking down, so I'm a little bit surprised that the attackers have been so reticent in bringing their units forward. Still the Belagair archers trying to tag units. Dunedain Troll Slayer's the main target. Very understandable. Such a dangerous unit, like I said. Arthedain, really the standout thing about the faction overall is the fact they have serviceable infantry, but their cavalry and their ranged units are where they really earn their keep. And the Arthedain marksmen now are going to start firing in response to this. Don't know how many of these arrows are going to hit, because it's not the easiest of shots. But they are shooting downhill, these Belagair archers, taking losses actually. Fairly resilient as far as archers go with those bucklers, but not going quite so well for them at the moment, and Y2K will have to start moving forward into the jaws of this Arthedain front line at some stage. Pikemen and men-at-arms going to make up the initial positions. And still over here, a little bit more now coming forward, some Uruk-hai Reavers and another unit of Raiders, but you can see there the Reavers have taken an awful lot of damage. Still just the one unit of Arthedain men-at-arms being tasked with holding on to the front line. I really do feel as though at this point Isengard should be moving forward a little bit more. I mean, the battle isn't overtly long, so eventually you'd have to say that Isengard on the front line are going to move forward in numbers, and Umbar will do so from the other side, and then the battle will be decided one way or the other really very quickly, I would imagine. Whether the attackers fizzle out under the barrage that Arthedain provides, or whether the attackers barge their way through the Arthedain defence and overrun them, one thing or the other is bound to happen. Still a few more volleys coming in from those Belagair archers in behind. Still not too eager to commit their infantry though, the attackers, although the defenders have now set up a front line, interestingly enough. Their pikes are without the protection of a unit of Arthedain men-at-arms over here, so even with the armour upgrade, the basic Umbar skirmishers will fancy their chance at putting a bit of a dent in these Arthedain pikemen over here. So they will doubtless continue to fire. Trebuchet getting into position, which could be pretty nasty for those squares of Belagair footmen, as we make our way over to the entryway to the settlement across the bridge. Do Isengard look like breaking through at any moment over here? Defeat seems certain now for the Arthedain men-at-arms, although I don't see why. They have the numbers still. Yes, the axes from those Uruk-hai Reavers are likely to be a little bit concerning. They will fight on. They've still got reinforcements they can commit forward. There's only so much infantry Arthedain have though, which is why when Isengard commit forward in numbers, I'm not sure if Arthedain will react quickly enough to block that. Alcarondas Legion now moving forward, and they will be the ones to collide with this front line first as they charge in, and then coming in support will be the units of Belagair footmen. There's actually rotting meat being used by the Umbar trebuchet by the looks of things, which is an interesting choice. So the superior quality of the Umbar troops, the Alcarondas Legion, extremely high morale. Perhaps they intend to break the Arthedain front line and then in the ensuing panic send forward all of their infantry. It's gone a little bit better for the attackers over on this side, you would have to say, as the rotting meat makes its presence known. Arrows flying from over the top of the hill. That looks pretty cool, in fact, as the Arthedain marksmen and Belagair archers continue to duel against one another. Mevin actually sending over some Uruk-hai over here, so certainly I would say, ooh, and a hit there on that trebuchet. Most unfortunate for Umbar. But the Uruk-hai infantry are here. A rain of arrows coming down, but much like the Umbar Alcarondas Legion, the armour and shields will really help them. But this, looking good so far for the attackers over here, I would say. Much better than on the front line, and maybe that's the idea. Maybe they do intend on focusing over there, and at least to start off with, over here will only be a token force. Basic units of Raiders and Reavers being sent forward by Wojciech, and then as more and more resources get sent over to the front of the cathedral over there to defend the secondary approach, that's maybe when we'll start to see a big push across the bridge as well. But this over here is the main event. We go down to half speed. Arthedain pikemen holding on to the front line. This is where their armour upgrade will help them, to be fair. It will help them be more resilient, but they need more infantry on this front line because the intention of the attackers is clear. They intend to try and buckle the front line, and they are succeeding for the moment. Balakith's shield bearers moving forward as well, that'll have just that little bit of armour piercing that will only help out against the armoured Arthedain soldiers. Arthedain men-at-arms are over here, to be fair, but there are also no pikes over here, so it is a bit of a fractured front line, this. Usually you want to have the combined arms of the men-at-arms within the pikes. That is the classic Arthedain front line. Men-at-arms or Evington spearmen, anyway. But on this occasion, two distinct entities, and now the Balakith shield bearers are going to try and push through. And it's not going all that well for these Arthedain men-at-arms. Now, as soon as they push through this front line, they could be met with a really nasty volley from the Dunedain Troll Slayers, and indeed they will be. There's also another unit of man-at-arms on the way over. Oof. The angle is just against Umbar, but one good hit on the Troll Slayers would be significant. Arrows from the low ground still being used. Uruk-hai archers now joining in. Not as resilient as the Umbar skirmishers, nor will they be as impressive at range, but all that matters is getting those arrows down range and putting some pressure on Arthedain here. Numbers, in a scenario like this where the defenders have one less army than the attackers, always going to favour the attackers. And Umbar and Isengard, not exactly the lowest quality of factions either. But here you can see where there are holes in this front line. I have to say the positioning of those Troll Slayers is rather nice, doing quite a bit of damage to those units as they try to filter through the gaps. Those Troll Slayers as well, once they're out of javelins, they can be such a devastating tool in melee as well. That armour piercing going to be very, very useful against both of the attacking armies today. They're pushing back against this single unit of Arthedain men-at-arms though, and they have had to commit forward more infantry. There's Uruk-hai pikemen on the way across from Wojciech as Arthedain try to contain the situation, because if pikemen get in behind even these basic units of Uruk-hai, that will help to solidify their front line. Surely Arthedain then will look to use their skirmishers a little bit more readily than they have done at the moment. And that is exactly what's going to be happening now. The ballista not quite ready to set off yet, but the Arthedain marksmen firing at the pikes as they cross the bridge from both sides. Pincer movement, or attack really. Yes, the Uruk-hai pikemen do come with that nice armour that the Uruk-hai produce, but no shield, and they're such an obvious target to go for in this situation for the Arthedain marksmen that you cannot argue at all with that. Meanwhile, continuing to try and push their way through the Arthedain front line, which is continuing to struggle over here. This is where the attackers, I think, are going to win or lose this fight. Another unit of Arthedain men-at-arms being committed to try and plug the hole that Umbar and Isengard are making if these Balagai footmen try to push their way forwards. A very nice buffer on the front line, this, as they continue to try and make something happen here. But Umbar have already committed forward most of their stuff. They've got a couple more units of Alcarondas Legion, but beyond that, Umbar will be looking at spending most of their resources over here, and from then on it will be entirely down to Isengard whether they can go on to win this fight or not. Warns of the North are still here, still those Uruk-hai archers firing up and over, hitting several of the eyes of the Arthedain soldiers, I should say. You can see though, these Dunedain Troll Slayers haven't taken a great deal of losses, even though there are arrows flying all over the place. Another unit of Troll Slayers. All of these men-at-arms so far doing their job at being just a nice, dependable infantry unit. Even if they do find themselves in parts outmatched, the round shields of the Balagai units and the slightly bigger rectangular shields of the shield bearers, those maces, maybe finding it a little bit more difficult than they otherwise would thanks to the presence of those Arthedain pikemen. And there are some Uruk-hai archers, Alcarondas legions still moving forward. Dismounted Fornoster Rhine Knights on the way over, more and more being committed, which I think is a sign that more is going to be required on the front here, underneath the tree cover. The pikes have managed to make it into melee, to be fair, and they haven't been savaged to the extent that maybe you would think, but they are being hit in the back. A bit of friendly fire, but it's definitely worthwhile for the amount of Uruk-hai they're killing, especially considering that it's pikes. And still nothing but Arthedain men-at-arms have been used in melee over here. Some slightly more heavy hitters being committed to the hill defence in front of the unit of Dunedain Peacekeepers, the hill defence in front of the cathedral. But still, very much in the balance. The decisive moment in this battle has not yet come. A couple of units of Arthedain marksmen still here. You can still see how the front line is bowing because, yeah, there's a few units, there's a few Arthedain men-at-arms in here, but it's mostly pikes and these Balak's shield bearers trying to push in, trying to disrupt that formation, and you have to say they are succeeding for the time being. Victory seems certain, only a fool could lose this battle. Getting into close quarters against pikes. Pikes have got low stats, of course, and those maces being armor-piercing, those breastplates will not be quite as useful as they would be against other foes. Is this rotting meat, I wonder? More and more Isengard forces finding their way over on this side. In fact, Mevin seems to have brought his entire army over here, which, to be fair, is probably the wise call. This is a much better area to try and attack across rather than the bridge, but eventually Wojciech will need to try and cross that bridge with his full force on his own. You could argue Mevin may have needed to send a little bit of support. Dunedain Troll Slayers continuing to do their thing here on this front line as well. Point blank, doing some nice damage. I mean, not in huge quantities, but they're still killing off more of this Umbar infantry. More men-at-arms, still not quite ready to commit something like the dismounted Fornosterine Knights, which maybe they should, because that's exactly the sort of thing that would give the Alcarondas Legion pause, at least. A worthy opponent. As we cut through the arrow fire there. Doesn't look like Wojciech is too eager to try and cross this bridge, as he continues to try and make do with what he has over here for the time being. But he is at least forcing Arthedain to bring forward a bit more. Arthedain bringing their own pikes forward, a full unit of them though, which surely is going to mean Isengard are going to need a little bit more. Maybe it's time for the trolls. He should still have his trolls, and indeed he does. Because what do they have over here? Do they have troll slayers? I would assume that the troll slayers have all been committed over to the other side. The ballista might be used against the trolls, I suppose, but that might be a risk that Wojciech is going to have to take here as Arthedain begin to reinforce this position as well. So far, I think Arthedain will be pleased with how it's going over here, and I think both sides will be fairly neutral on this here. I mean, Arthedain still have the ability to contain this situation if they so choose. I think they need to as well, because if they end up losing this front line, actually looking at this more and more, gaps are starting to really appear as Umbar start to prize the Arthedain front line apart. And now Isengard are going to consolidate those gains by bringing forward a couple of units of Uruk-hai infantry that are in pretty decent nick. And they're going to do their thing. And the problem is, with a settlement like this, once you're through, the initial defence is wide open, and that's where those units of Warg Riders could come in. It doesn't matter how well they've done on the bridge defence over there, if their rear is then exposed, and that's when surely Wojciech will cross the bridge. Trolls first, all of those forces of evil pressurising as well. Arthedain marksmen looking like they're out of ammunition, but this is not going all that well for Arthedain any longer. The situation looks bleak. Yeah, these Arthedain men-at-arms, this is the problem. I think Arthedain tried to get away with only using their basic units on the front line when a bit of quality was needed. We saw this issue with the defenders, well, not with the defenders on the last battle replay, but we've seen this issue with defenders several times in the past where they want to save their elites for later. I get the sense that's kind of what they're doing here. They've used the ammunition from the Troll Slayers, to be fair, but nothing in melee. And you can't afford to be complacent when you're dealing with factions of the level of Umbar and Isengard, because you're going to get punished for it if you try and shortchange them. And Arthedain's infantry, like I said, is functional, but it's not quite up to the level of, especially Umbar, but even Isengard, to be honest. When you're talking about the upper end fighting Uruk-hai, it's going to be tough for them. They're going to try and shut things down here with some Dunedain mounted company charging in. Their sword cavalry though, so their charge is not going to be quite as devastating, but this could still work, and those Uruk-hai infantry do turn their back on the charge. I think they're trying to avoid the majority of that charge from connecting, but in the end several of these Uruk-hai do end up getting cut down. That trebuchet I think is out of ammunition anyway. The trebuchet is already done. It's already contributed to the battle at any rate. Some Arthedain forces still fighting hard on the front line, not routing, to be fair. Credit to them for that. Dismounted Knights of Enuminus on the way across, so they're ready to commit some quality now by the looks of things, with some Peacekeepers. Those Dismounted Knights, that's a little bit more like it. The basic Arthedain units may not be quite on the level of the Uruk-hai infantry, but these units certainly are, and then some. Over here, meanwhile, on the bridge, still Isengard content to just send this token force in, effectively lambs to the slaughter. and Arthedain continue to hold on to the bridge resolutely, and to be fair, Percival's army may need to think about sending over some support for his ally if they intend to keep things under control. They've got the quality here, Arthedain, but if the situation gets a little bit chaotic, that's where stuff like the Warg Riders can come into play. And the attacking players as well, I recognise all the names. Very experienced names. You would imagine they know exactly how to exploit the situation for their benefit. Umbar, though, have committed a lot to this fight, so it's going to be up to Mevin, effectively, to pick up the baton from Y2K86 as his Umbar army takes more and more losses. Uruk-hai infantry in here, more the Balagai footmen pushing forward, the dismounted Fornosterine knights. Some of them getting into melee at the very least. A very impressive looking unit. I love the sword model that they have. Over here, meanwhile, this poor unit of Arthedain men-at-arms. There's still quite a lot of them left, to be fair, but they're being tasked with facing off against infantry that is above their pay grade, and it certainly shows. Arrows still coming in from Arthedain, though. Several of those Alcarondas Legion falling. This is the moment, I would say. This could be the decisive moment in the battle. Mevin is committing his Warg Riders forward. If he can find some good charges, if he can really start to do some damage to these Arthedain front lines, it could be a real watershed moment in favour of the attackers here. You can see the dismounted Fornosterine Knights going to try and block their transit into the settlement itself. Kind of succeeding. Bit of a weird charge, that. I mean, to be fair, with all of these units on the front line, Arthedain marksmen now out of ammunition, backing stuff like the dismounted Knights up. Here are the Dunedain Peacekeepers as well. They'll carve their way through Balagai units. The Uruk-hai infantry are too depleted as well to match them one-to-one. And the Warns of the North continue to fire in as well. So those armour-piercing missiles, you can tell the attackers are suffering for this, but it could all prove to be worthwhile if the Warg Riders can do their thing. But Percival does have his cavalry over here. He does have his Dunedain mounted company. Will they be used to good effect? I mean, with 2 units of Wargs, they could sandwich them, but time spent on the mounted company is time not spent on trying to hunt down some of the more vulnerable aspects of the Arthedain army. Arthedain pikemen getting into melee, another fresh unit of pikes. Mevin's Uruk-hai's progress has been well and truly stopped. Troll Slayers in front of the cathedral. Still those archers trying to fire in. The Dunedain Mounted Company is going to try and go after the Wargs, but the Wargs managing to circumvent this, and they will be able to charge into this unit of Arthedain marksmen. We shall be back for that momentarily. This, however, Isengard, I feel as though they really need to make something happen over here, Isengard. The time is now. I know we're on half speed, but he's dragging his heels a bit here, Wojciech, and his army's now mobilising, so better late than never. The Wargs colliding in. But now that the Wargs are here, this is the moment, with all of this chaos going on, now is the moment when you need to be trying to cross the bridge, as several of those marksmen fall under the weight of that Warg Rider charge. They're going to try and get out of here. Wargs vulnerable to missiles, of course, as the Dunedain Mounted Company make their way over. Men-at-arms. There's not really there's no spearmen. The only out-and-out anti-cavalry unit that Arthedain have are their pikes, and their pikes are going to be sorely needed to help hold on to the front line, so those Warg Riders, like I said, could yet be the undoing. There goes one of the dismounted knights. Alcarondas Legion here in numbers, but Arthedain doing really well on this front line. I think actually there's another unit model coming for the dismounted. I don't know if it's the dismounted version, but I'm pretty sure there is a new model coming for the mounted variant, which has got some, or one of the two anyway, which has got like a slightly darker colour scheme, and it's got some different heraldry on it, which looks fantastic. People at this point have got plenty of experience with making unit models for Medieval 2, and it really shows. Uruk-hai Berserkers on the way forward, those Dunedain Troll Slayers doing a lot of damage. Gaps have appeared, but have the attackers taken full advantage of those gaps? I'm not sure that they have. Uruk-hai Berserkers rushing forth. Going to use those big two-handers, trying to bunch up into melee with the Troll Slayers. The Berserkers have actually managed to make it to the front line relatively, in fact completely unscathed, so their hit points are going to be intact. Those big hooked swords that the Uruk-hai like to use as well are going to be able to deliver a nice amount of armour-piercing damage to the warriors of Arthedain, which are still here. The Dunedain Peacekeepers holding on very nicely, but with the Berserkers here, will they be able to continue to do that? They'll do a decent amount of damage to the Berserkers in return, actually. Arthedain men-at-arms now, though, getting into the backfield, finding a gap, the same gap actually that the Warg Riders took, in behind enemy lines now with the Arthedain Man-at-Arms. I mean, there's a lot of units still down there from Nevern, as well as Arthedain have done in doing damage. I'm not sure whether it's going to be enough as the battle goes on, especially with a whole nother army yet to come. There we go. I mean, there's still the Wargs here as well. Can they shut the Wargs down? The Wargs could just try and charge head-on into the dismounted Fornoster Rhine Knights, but the Wargs managing to duck and dive out the way of the Dunedain Mounted Company. In fact, the Dunedain Mounted Company clearly got sandwiched at some point, because they've lost over half their number. Is this where they died? No, that's over there. Meanwhile, Wojciech with another advance across the bridge, but again, it's another unit of Uruk-hai Raiders only. Percival will be quite comfortable so far, and with this being the case, considering you've still got a ballista, I would leave a token force on the bridge and send as much reinforcements as I could over towards this front line, because this really is the important engagement here. The Warg Riders charge in, going to do a decent amount of damage here to the Troll Slayers. As soon as the Troll Slayers turn around though, those axes are going to be pretty devastating against these Warg Riders. Sandwich between those Wargs and the Berserkers though, not exactly a pleasant place to be, even for a bold and noble Dunedain warrior. Over here though, Arthedain doing quite nicely for themselves. The Alcarondas Legion, like I said, Umbar very much down to the embers of their army at this stage. They still have more to commit though. 3 units of Uruk-hai pikemen. Nevern again, he's saving his pikes for later. He knows exactly what he's doing by making that the case, even if it looks relatively even in the late game. If he has the pikes and his opponent doesn't, it's going to look pretty grim for him. Guards of Orthanc also further back there, another nice unit to have for later on because they're so difficult to wear down, as are the Narun Aru Royal Guard. Y2K committing them forward as well. Pretty much everything being left out on the field from him. Those Dunedain Troll Slayers though, doing some nasty damage. I have to say, Arthedain, in spite of the fact they're 2 players who are not as experienced as any of the 3 attackers, I would say, there's a lot of things they've done which I've rather liked. I think just some of their front line being prized apart as a result of not using that combined arms technique on the front line with the pikes and the infantry may be a very key moment in this battle, because it's made them get pushed back, it's made the front line a little bit broken up, it's allowed the attackers to find a few gaps. One to the north, are they out of ammunition? I mean, they're such a fantastic melee unit as well though, that's the thing. The Wargs, looks like they have been caught at this stage in between Arthedain Man-at-Arms and Fornoster Rhine Knights. They should be able to get out of here though, to be honest. They will take losses while doing so, surely. But like I said, those Wargs are such a nuisance at this stage in the game. They've still got those Anuminous Gate Guards. This, though, is a concern for Arthedain, surely. Arthedain marksmen starting to open up. The pikemen are here, as are the men-at-arms, but now Wojciech has decided that now is the time. We're coming towards the end of the battle as well. I wonder if we can read anything into that as the Trolls start to collide with the Arthedain Men-at-Arms. Exactly the sort of unit that Trolls like this will be really good against. The Arthedain Men-at-Arms won't be capable of dealing with damage quickly enough to a unit as scary as this. Pikes, even more so, will find their formation disrupted. Arrows coming in, but again, not going to do enough damage quickly enough, you would say. One of the Trolls finds himself down here. Now surely is the time for the ballista. I don't know whether Percival has simply forgotten about his ballista, but if he has, then that's one of the areas in which I would criticise the defenders, because that's such an important tool in this sort of situation. You can't afford to forget about it. And it does look as though that is, in fact, what has happened. A tragedy, to say the least. Meanwhile, still out here in the more open areas of the field, the Warg Riders are still alive, far depleted from what they once were. Dunedain Peacekeepers continuing to do their thing. Their guard mode, firing at will, trying to use their javelins first and foremost. Arthedain trying to push back, but in so doing they have left more gaps, which, yeah, like that's how you can tell the difference. Ooh, is that going to be? It looks like it's going for the ballista actually. But that is where I think the experience level has differed. The attackers, you can tell they were very organised, they knew exactly when to push, they knew what to do. The defenders, they did some very good things actually, but the gaps that they've left in their line have been, you'd have to say, ruthlessly exploited. And I am not sure now whether Arthedain will have the ability. I mean, just based on the fact that it's gradually turning more and more chaotic, this fight, is generally a sign that the attackers are in the ascendancy. Warns of the North, they are getting overrun a little bit, swinging their long swords, cleaving through Uruk-hai, but there seems to be more and more to replace him, and I think Mevon now knows that now is the time to commit the Uruk-hai pikemen, try and really wrap this battle up now. More units coming across from Percival. Are they... is it too little too late though? And as soon as these reinforcements moved, is that the reason why Wojciech has now decided to move across the bridge in more numbers? Arthedain marksmen being committed forward to try and deal with the trolls, but yeah, clearly here, lots of damage being done. Trolls starting to fall away, but they will have taken a lot of Arthedain soldiers with them. Is that ballista moving now? It's marching. Need to start firing at something at this point. Uruk-hai crossbowmen, who have been a target, clearly, of all of the Arthedain archers. Rightly so. If you allow the crossbows to get into position and have their way with you at this stage, then you're finished at this level. Meanwhile, dismounted Fornoster Rhine Knights. Uruk-hai archers still with a bit of ammunition. This is all going to add up. Another unit of Arthedain men-at-arms. So more and more of Percival's units are finding their way across here now. Here we can see some Dunedain Troll Slayers, very good unit, but they're just overwhelmed by Uruk-hai Berserkers, wielding those large two-handed weapons. A few Warg Riders still alive, they've definitely done their job. Mevon having a good time with them. And again, no anti-cavalry units that were mobile, other than that one unit of mounted company. And the Wargs gave them the runaround. You can't rely on your pikes to be an anti-cavalry tool like that because they're so important to your front line. Going pike to pike here, the Uruk-hai pikemen actually losing this engagement because of the superior numbers of the Arthedain pikes, but that's only one such example. The trebuchet crew is now fighting as well. And more of the arrows are coming from the attacker's side into the defensive positions now. A worry. Dismounted Fornoster Rhine Knights arriving. They'll do well, I'm sure. Just having a little look down here. He's still got a decent amount of units here, Wojciech. The timer, pardon me. The timer won't be enough to save the defenders either, because it's barely half the sand has run through the hourglass at this stage. That ballista could cause a mass rout though. That could yet be a bit of a saving grace for Arthedain if they can cause Wojciech's army to rout en masse. Percival can score a great victory over here. They could yet turn the tide. Pikes arriving for both sides, including the gate guards. Dismounted Knights of Numis. I think Percival's just going to try and throw everything he can in here. Hope that that's going to be enough to hold the line. And with the rest, he's going to send over here to try and bail his ally out. The Warg Riders charging in, still continuing to be a nuisance. I think I might have watched too much of the game if I'm predicting the way battles may go based on small events. At this point, the black capes of the Arthedain warriors continuing to withstand the onslaught for the time being, but Mevon's crossbows are now in place, and unlike on the other side where they had the archers to deal with them, over here they're less lucky. And the Uruk-hai, possibly with everything they have now, should be able to see victory be theirs. Crossbow bolts at point blank range, although I don't know. You'd think Royal Guard, the trebuchet is getting into place with a bit of support. But these Warns of the North continue to cut their way through these pikes, and the pike formations haven't been ideally sorted out. What's going on back here? Oh, I say. Something that I didn't see because we were on the attacker side. The Grey Company reveal themselves. That is a bit of a game changer, because I was saying, even though they're starting to do quite well over on the other side, if Wojciech decides to just charge forward and crush the defence on the bridge, it's not going to matter in the grand scheme of things. But that may very well be the difference here. because they're going to be able to do tons of damage to Wojciech's reserves, and he's going to allow them to do so by the looks of things, which is remarkable. And even here in the late game, suddenly I'm not so sure. In fact, this is a very well designed scenario, I would say. Just based on how it's set up, either side could certainly win this. The announcer still fancies the attacker's chances, and due to the numbers you would be hard pressed to disagree. Forward come the guards of Orthanc from Navan. They're going to try and burrow into this Arthedain pike block and finally try and secure victory over here. Will it be enough? There's Nazkai still. I mean, that's the thing. They've still got really high quality infantry over here. The Grey Company leaving the area. Dunedain Rangers on their way across. Dunedain Troll Slayers as well revealing themselves. I wonder if perhaps some sort of condition for the attacker's victory is going to be met before they arrive. Could it be the loss of a general or something? Because with those units being that far away, they're not going to arrive to the battle in time. Arthedain continue to take damage from the crossbows. Nazkai pouring through. I mean, that's the problem. I think they're just not going to arrive in time, and I think perhaps the cathedral may fall, and that, I would assume, is going to be the end of the battle. So I think perhaps by objective, the attackers are going to win this. With the Grey Company, the Rangers and the Troll Slayers, could that have made the difference? It is possible. It's a lot of units though. The Grey Company are on their way across. A hailstorm of crossbow bolts coming in. Yeah, the attackers are ahead by quite a lot, even with the Grey Company starting to fire at those Uruk-hai crossbows, those arrows ripping through them as we speak. What a fascinating battle this has been, and I do wonder what the conditions were for the attackers' victory, because clearly that's what's happened, unless we see them admit defeat en masse, which somehow I doubt. Defeat seems certain. The Umbar trebuchet arriving. Uruk-hai infantry guarding the rear from those Troll Slayers and Rangers. They are still holding on over here, Arthedain, so it's a remarkably close fight, this, in those terms, but based on the evidence I have, I can only give the... Ah, is that the reason? Are they going to admit defeat en masse? How bizarre. Oh wait, yes, it must be. Close defeat. So the Umbar general fell, and as a result the defenders won? Interesting. I thought the attackers were going to win because maybe it's sort of like you capture the cathedral and then Arthedain have lost, but I guess the loss of the Umbar general, the loss of Castamere, has meant that Arthedain have won this fight. And fair play to them, those units that were in reserve. It's almost like a free-for-all-esque reveal of all of these hidden Dunedain units that you were saving until later on. They came in, and I suppose that's the risk you take if you're in this situation. If you know that loss of your general is going to cause your defeat and you commit him in anyway to try and seize your victory, I can only assume that's the case. If Theron does want to tell me if I'm wrong, then please do, because this is your scenario, of course. I knew that there were rules attached to it, but the only thing that I received was the replay file and the map. Irregardless, I think considering this is the first time that Theron has made a scenario, this is a very well designed one, I would say. It's not often you see scenarios with only 5 armies on the field. It is also worth saying as well that we won't manage to get through this battle without any technical maladies, albeit this is a battle replay on a slightly smaller scale than we have seen. I'd be very interested to see if the larger scale battle on Merlond proceeds without any problems, which that will be perhaps a better litmus test for that sort of thing than this. But so far so good. It means that I won't be completely unable to utilise my PC for recording if that is in fact the case. We shall have to wait and see. But yeah, nice scenario this, and hopefully there's more where that came from yet another person who's throwing their hat into the scenario creating ring. Let's see what did the damage for the Isengard armies of Mevin and of Wojciech. The Nazkai doing nicely, plenty of, well, I say nicely, they were only committed late on, but considering that, they did okay. Uruk-hai Raiders, they're just fodder, of course. Some units not even getting committed, so Wojciech, that is a sign perhaps that he should have been a little bit more aggressive with what he had. Trolls the White Hand, though, when they were committed, it was at the right time, because it was against units that weren't very good against them, and they did manage to fill their boots in terms of kills. Mevin's army, on the other hand, did a little bit better. I would suggest that if it was the case that losing that Umbar general was the victory condition, Mevin should have been the one to go in first over here, and he should have been more on the front foot, perhaps, than Umbar were. That would have been my assessment. I assumed that Umbar were going in to soften them up, and then Mevin would be the one to smash them to pieces, and that looked like what was happening, but perhaps it should have been the other way around if that was the case. Some very good performances, though. The Uruk-hai Berserkers, when they were committed, they did really, really well. The Wargs, the uses of the Wargs was from Mevin was really, really good. And for the most part, the attackers played this very, very well, but they will have known the rules going in, and if you put your general under that much pressure, it's always a chance that he will fall. So yeah, fair play indeed. And long may more people commit themselves to making scenarios, because it used to be that it was only really Eclipse that was making these, and obviously it's very tiring to do that sort of thing. So it's good to see people like Morris, Froggy, and now hopefully Theron as well start to make more of these. We shall wait and see. But yes, big thank you to Theron for sending this one to me and allowing me to show off your hard work. And a big thank you to all of the players that were also a part of this battle replay as well. Now, like I said, I think I'll probably do a large-scale siege next, and the only one I have in the listing at the moment is Merlon. It may not be my favourite map, because it always tends to work out in a similar sort of way, but I do think I need to do it just to test if it was only that replay on Moria that was causing problems. Perhaps it was an Nvidia issue, because there was some weirdness going on with before I started recording this one, where I had to fiddle around with some things and download updates, because Nvidia is laughably incompetent at what they do when it comes to updates. Maybe that was a potential issue as well. I've cleaned my PC, but that was also hard crashed even after I did that. I'll probably clean it again before I do Merlon, just to make sure that I've done absolutely everything I can from my perspective to make sure it's not a hardware issue. If it hard crashes again, then it'll be the sort of thing that I have to think quite closely about. But this gives me hope, because this one, there was no such issues on this battle, and there was a lot of, to be fair, there was some taxing moments on the hardware on this battle. Even though I was going at half speed, we were going right up into the guts of that fight, and there was no problem. So I have hope. I have hope. Irregardless of that, other plans, so Merlon will likely be the next battle. Hopefully I get a few more replays, so I'm trying to do as many as I can before I get sent away and to do field work again. So hopefully I can get as many replays done before then, and while I'm away, hopefully a few more will come in and we'll be able to continue the recording cycle as we often do. I may also be doing, I should have done a live stream channel update at some point in May, which by the time this replay comes out will probably be about a month, or over a month actually, in the past. But it may be by this point that I need to start thinking about doing another one. I'm always trying, I've got to be a little bit more, I've got to be better at transmitting this information to people, rather than just talking about it at the end of these battle replays. I think some more dedicated channel updates, maybe a regular slot per month, or every 2 months even, would be a good idea. I think that would be the best way to proceed, because it would just allow me to engage with the community a little bit better, because with the lack of live streams now, and with the fact that I'm only doing 2 videos a week rather than the 3 that I used to, and also the fact that I'm away, so it's harder for me to actually engage with the comment sections on my videos in the way that I would like. It's a way for me to engage in, at least for now, it's a way for me to engage better with the community. Hopefully we can get back at some stage to what it was previously, where I can be a little bit more back and forth with people. But that won't be for the time being. For the rest, certainly for the rest of 2021, this will have to be how it is. Going into 2022, there's a lot of permutations, to be fair. There's a lot of things that can change. Like, there's no point in me trying to make long-term plans that far ahead, because so much is in flux, but such is the way of things, I suppose. But that's what I'm thinking anyway. More regular channel updates in a live stream format allow me to engage with the community a little bit better. So that's what I'm thinking of doing. So yeah, there's really nothing else to say. Big thank you to Theron and all the players once again. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.